High school can be very tough academically. That's why a good study guide is extremely necessary to guide you through all of your subjects. Here's everything I'm going to be speaking about in today's video. Let's start with language. Now in my case, I had my home language and my first additional language. The difference between the two is that in your first additional language, you don't go in that much depth as in your home language. We had 3 papers that we had to write. Our first paper is all about language, our second is all about literature, and our third is creative writing. When studying for a paper that's mainly about language, it's most important to look at past papers. I then go to my homework exercises, or you can go to your teacher for extra exercises to practice in the things that you keep getting wrong. If you're still struggling and you can't seem to grasp the concept, go to your teacher and ask them to explain it to you thoroughly, and you can even try showing them the exercises you worked out, and they can show you where you keep getting stuff wrong. Literature can turn into a lot of work really quick if you don't study smart. With drama pieces, books that we had to read for the year, or short stories, I'd re-listen or reread those pieces before the exam starts. What I did for one of the books that I couldn't find audibly is I'd record myself while I read it once through, from start to finish. It does take long while you do it the first time, but you have to remember, for your upcoming exams, you can listen to that audio on 2 speed, so you can cut down 8 hours into 4 hours. A lot of the times, I didn't need to go back to questions that I did after I've listened to the book, because I have an overall view and I've picked up on small little details, and while I'm listening to the book, I can discuss stuff in my head. Another thing you also have to remember is that if you listen to the book each time before you write a test or an exam on it, you've listened to the book way more than 3, 4, or 5 times. So you'll have a good grasp on everything that you need to know, especially when it comes to essay questions, where you need to write about 400 to 500 words in metric. Another part of literature exams is poems. Now what I've found is that if you understand the poem, you're already halfway there. Then, after you've understood your poem, it's so important to go and look at your terminology about things like synecdoche, or assonance, or alliteration. It's good to know your poem terminology, but it's even more important to know how to apply that terminology to a poem. That way, when you get an unseen poem, it's easier for you to identify those things because you already know them. If you don't know your tools that you need to use, you're not going to be able to identify them. And it also makes your study work less, because you don't necessarily have to memorize the poem's alliteration or assonance, because you can identify it. But what I did find is that we had so much material on each poem that you didn't really know what notes should you take and what notes should you leave. If you are having this problem, it's easier to make your own notes about each poem, and as you make those study notes, you also learn the poem. Something that is quite scary about the literature paper for a lot of people is the literature essay. Keep your eyes open, because I am going to be making a video on how I do literature essays and some tips and tricks along the way. So if you want to go the extra mile before you learn for a literature exam, you can pre-write some literature essays, but what I liked to do is I would make a list of things. As you go through past papers, you'll notice some patterns about things they actually asked about. For example, in the book The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, you'll notice that they usually ask about the duality of men, for example. So make a list about all the examples that you can find through the book about duality of men. That way, when you write your literature essay or answer your questions, you have a solid way to back your answers. A really good method for answering the questions and the essay is to first of all rewrite your question, then make strong points to answer your question, and add examples and explain the examples of the point that you made. That way you have a lot of material that you've written and a strong backing for your point. For example, if they ask you, what is the impact of the duality of men in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde? Rewrite the question. The impact of the duality of men in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is, then make your strong point to answer the question. Take one of the examples that you have already made in your list when you studied, write it down. You can even write the page number if you've memorized that, and substantiate it by explaining why the example is suitable. I find it better to work in list form than actually pre-writing essays, because the chance of you getting an essay question exactly the same, it happens, but not a lot. So work with lists, work with examples, and work from there. The third paper that falls under language is your creative writing section. I gotta be honest, there's not really a way that you can learn for this, but you can practice it. Usually what I would do before an exam is I'd look at the formats of the things that I know I usually pick. In my case, I never chose dialogue, instruction, or obituaries in English, although I did do obituaries in Afrikaans. A format that I always looked at before I went into a paper is the format of how your address should look. Practice is key. So if you're in class and you get the chance to practice writing for homework or maybe even for marks, take the opportunity with both hands, because you're actually studying beforehand even though you don't know it. It's important to go to your teacher that has seen your work before, so that you can talk to them about what mistakes you keep making and what you can improve. It's all about getting to know your strengths and weaknesses and working on them. In biology, I've noticed that the first step, if it's not already done for you, is to divide your work into chapters, especially with your notes. Divide your notes into booklets for meiosis, mitosis, and for example, the reproductive system. Then, if it's clearly marked, you know exactly where you need to go to learn those specific chapters that you're struggling with. Usually, I learn the terminology first, and then I'd go to homework questions and maybe some past papers that we did in class. But personally, I never really looked at the previous year's past papers with biology, because I found that it's more important for me to study the material and know the material so that I can apply it to my work. Usually in biology, I would make notes, but this year I decided against it because it took way too long and we got really good study notes from our teacher. If you do decide to make notes, make sure that you keep updating your notes as you go along, because in homework questions and things like that, you'll pick up tiny little pieces of information that you forgot to put in your notes. I found that there were 3 things that I studied from when learning for biology. Firstly, it's your main study notes. It's sort of like the class that you got from your teacher, but just on paper. Then you have your essay questions. These are questions that you need to understand, but also need to memorize. For example, the route that light passes through your eye, or the route that sound goes through your ear to your brain. These are really important for each chapter because they help you to understand the terminology, and they also help you in questions that are essay questions or are mini essay questions for 6 points or for 8 points. So once you've memorized and understood them, you can write a whole page on this topic. Now, the reason why you need to learn this is it gives you a strong start in the exam, because you know exactly what to write and you know exactly where you're heading with your questions, so that you don't write all over the place. The more you can help the examinator, the better for you. And then thirdly, definitions. So these will be words that you need to know the definition of, or even just monkey puzzle questions. With mathematics, I found the key to success is practice. In my case, before I did anything to study for the exam, I would do a past paper. You spend about 3 hours to work through that past paper, or maybe 4 hours, but it gives you an overall view of exactly what you need to work on and what you can already do. This cuts down your study time because you only need to learn the parts that you know you struggle with, and the parts that you know you can do, you only need to refresh your mind on that. Since there are so many examples of questions in mathematics, it's really important to have good study notes. This can be notes you got from your teacher, notes you've made, or it can even be your textbook. It's important to know your notes and your textbook so that when you study, you don't have to search all over the place for everything because you know exactly where it is. If I found that I've struggled with chapters, I would go back to homework questions and back to extra exercises and redo those so that I can refresh my mind on how to do these things. I also found that Google and YouTube helped so much when studying for maths, because I only had to type in the chapter or the type of question into YouTube, and there would be a bunch of videos on how to do these questions. Some of the YouTube channels that helped me a lot were Khan Academy, Hou Net Opsikkel, and overall just any teacher on YouTube that have posted content for their learners during COVID onto YouTube. Then my overall tip for mathematics is learn your rules and learn the equations that you need to learn. You also need to determine beforehand if you are going to get an equation sheet or not, because that will determine what equations you need to learn. Physics and chemistry is a lot like maths. Practice, and past papers are going to be your best friends. I'd usually also start off with a past paper just to determine what I need to work on and what I already know off by heart. After I've worked out a past paper, I would go back to the section that I struggled. I went over their terminology once more, and I also did a lot more practice questions on those topics. After all that, I would go and I'd learn my definitions and touch up the terminology that I don't know as well. If I have time, I would go back and repeat the process over and over and over again until I am as well prepared as I can be. Just like maths, make sure that you go to YouTube and Google and search up your specific type of question or the chapter, because sometimes you just need somebody else to explain something in a different way for you to eventually grasp the concept. I found that Khan Academy India and Volkschool were my main online teachers. Another thing that you can do that can help you a lot is, for us specifically, our Department of Education gave us these little booklets for chemistry and physics, and in these books each chapter is allocated to a type of question in the exam. So for instance, in chemistry, organic chemistry, they put in all the questions from the previous 10, 12 years of past papers in that one chapter, and so on and so on and so on. This helped so much, because if there was a chapter that I basically knew nothing on, I would only work through these 15 questions in that chapter, and then by the end I would master those topics. So for the first few questions, I would use my notes, my textbook, YouTube, to help me to understand how to do these questions. So if you don't get a booklet like this, I would highly recommend to set aside a time where you can start putting the questions in that order. With accounting, like with every other subject, good study notes are key. Understanding the main concepts of accounting is extremely important, and it helps you so much when answering essay questions or just normal questions. You need to remember that accounting is all about problem solving. And once again, past papers came to the rescue, because with accounting, I almost read through all of the past papers to try to figure out how to do some of the things that I just could not do. Eventually, you'll pick up patterns and you'll be able to do things more easily to get the most marks that you can. You also need to pay extra attention to discussion questions, because these were the questions that I lost most of my marks on because I didn't understand how to do them. So go back to your terminology, go back and learn those study notes and make your own notes. Go to YouTube. Once again, Volkschool came to the rescue. So type in your problem into YouTube. They'll have a video somewhere that can help you. To do well in life orientation, you need to know how to answer your questions. If you don't know how to answer your questions, then you can have good answers, but you didn't write enough, so you're not going to get your marks. And you need to rewrite your question. Always add an extra point. If they ask for 5 points, add 6. And make sure you write as much as you can in as much detail as you can. But it is important to not write unnecessary things. For example, let's say they ask you how you can improve the health of your community. Don't just say recycle and educate people. You'll maybe get 1 or 2 points if it was a 4-point question, or you'll get 1 point if it was a 2-point question. And even though your answers may be right, you didn't answer the question correctly like how they want you to answer it. So you should rather say, repeat the question. You can improve the health of your community by encouraging recycling. You repeated the question, you made your first point, now back that point up. This will provide a cleaner environment that can improve the community's physical and mental health. Now you bring in your second point, and you can repeat the question again here. Also host events to educate people on how to prevent illnesses like AIDS, and so on and so on and so on. So you can take a question that you made 2 points with, recycling, and educate people, and you can turn it into a whole paragraph and you'll get your 4 marks. Overall, you'll notice in subjects like life orientation, like we just mentioned, and language, as well as in certain cases of biology questions and math questions, you'll need to repeat the question in your answer. For example, in language, they might ask you, why was Hyde afraid of the police? Then you'd say, Hyde was afraid of the police because he was afraid of the gallows. He didn't want to be hung and die. This can also be applied with longer literature questions. Or you might notice in mathematics in certain problems that you can end your problem by saying, thus we can conclude that the triangles are the exact same shape. Or thus we can conclude that point A and point B are actually the same point and not different points. Or Thus, there are 10 blocks, not 8 blocks. This all depends on the type of question. These will be more in your type of math questions that want you to prove something. This will not be in questions, for example, like 1 plus 1 equals 2. Thus, we can say 1 plus 1 equals 2. It doesn't apply with those type of math questions. But where it does apply, it ends your question perfectly. It's the exact same with biology. Certain questions need it, certain questions don't. Hopefully you can hear me over the rain. But just to be thorough, I'll give you an example for biology as well. They might ask you, how does speciation happen in these rabbits? And you'll then repeat the question by saying, speciation happened in these rabbits due to, and then you just continue on with the steps that you need to take to answer that question. I know personally, I didn't know where to get past papers. It just seemed like such a hassle to get it off of the internet, because then you need to sort it out in a way, and it was just chaos. So I researched a lot, and there are a few different places where you can find them. Firstly, your teachers. You can ask each teacher from every subject for some past papers, and they'll probably give them to you. Some of them will print it out for you, others would rather prefer you give them a little stick, and then they'll just upload some past papers onto there. You can also go look on your Department of Education's website, and you might find some past papers on there. I did find that for Matric, you find a lot more researchers for past papers than you would for grade 11 or grade 10. You can also Google to find some past papers by just saying past papers, the year you want, and also the subject that you want it for. But my all-time favorite solution to finding them is using apps. When you go into Play Store, just type in past papers. If you don't find an app there that suits your needs, you can also try typing in past papers wherever you live. So past papers UK, past papers Australia, and so on and so on and so on. One of my all-time favorite applications that I used was past papers South Africa. I used this for every exam and test that I needed to prepare for. The thing that I loved most about this application is the fact that you have your question sheet, and when you swipe right, you have the memo right there for you. So it's organized and you can easily find the answer to your question if you need help. I know another application, I think its name is Don't Fail. A lot of my peers use that as well, but I didn't like the app much. I found that certain papers aren't there, certain memos aren't there, and I didn't really have that problem with past papers South Africa. So in summary, note-taking is important, but it's not for everyone. So don't waste your time on it if it doesn't work for you. On that note, you should also find a system that works for you for every subject. Not all subjects are the same, so you're not going to learn the same for all of them. It's also really important that if you do decide to change the style of how you learn for a subject, to do it way before you write an important test. You don't want to be in the position where you're at the end of the year and you've noticed that this isn't working and then you change it up. You can do it, but I would highly recommend against it. It's also really important to look for patterns in past papers. You can basically cut your work in half if you find these patterns, especially with types of math or physics or chemistry questions, because you notice certain steps that you need to take to answer that question. You feel dumb because you maybe can't answer the question, but more often than not, it's just that you don't use the right steps. It's not because you're dumb. Another thing when you start learning is to learn from the hardest concept for you through to the concept that's easiest. This way, if you run out of time while studying, you've already done the concepts that you struggle with most, and these that are left, you already kind of have a grip on. This will also help you to manage your energy better, because when you start learning, you usually have a lot of energy and you want to learn most of the time. And by the end of the study session, you're not as keen anymore, but then it's easy work. It can also be helpful to search up your specific study guide for each of your subjects, especially for chemistry and physics, as well as biology and maths. The examinators only work off of those study guides when they're setting up a test. These study guides are for free, and they help you to cut your study time down by a lot, because you only learn what you need to know, and what you need to know is in the study guide. You'll notice that sometimes they even include summarized pieces of work in these study guides that can help you a lot. We got ours specifically from our teacher every year from grade 10 to grade 12. And then something that you're probably going to hear so much from your teachers, especially in your last year in school, is to get enough sleep and to make sure you look after yourself. Your mental and physical health is extremely important if you want to succeed academically. Because if you're not healthy, you're going to struggle a lot with understanding new concepts, especially if they're harder. This will also help you to reduce stress anxiety, and it will help you focus more on the task at hand. It's also really important to remember to give yourself time. Especially in matric, you need to make yourself comfortable with the fact that you might not know anything and you might not understand anything of a topic for a really long time. And that is completely okay. And it's especially hard when you want to achieve academically because you might go into a test and still not completely understand the topic. But it's okay. Give yourself time, try your best, and that's the best that you can give. I've noticed with time, I don't know if it marinates in my brain or something, but with time, certain concepts just all of a sudden click. With others, it wasn't like that. With others, tiny bits and pieces clicked over time. But in my end exam, I kind of had a grasp on these things the best I could because I really struggled and I really tried. I fought. So give yourself time. It's okay. I know this video was more on the longer side, but I seriously hope that it helped you because I wish I had this information when I went into my grade 10, 11, and 12 year. If you have anything that you still wonder about or don't understand completely what I explained, please let me know in the comments down below. I'll gladly answer them. Have a nice day.